So ways that you can repurpose podcast content into more episodes, and that is having past guests on to talk further about a topic. I've done this a few times. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that it's actually a really great strategy to, one, make a deeper connection with those guests that you have on that you really enjoy talking to and bring value to your audience. If that person is bringing value, I would rather you have them on multiple times than to throw in a guest who might not be a good fit for your audience, who might not bring value. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. As business owners and as podcasters, we are busy, and creating consistent content for a podcast and then deciding, oh, I need to be on social media too, and I need to have a blog post, and I need to be having conversations with people. I also need to do client work, or I need to meet with clients, or I need to strategize with clients. All of that stuff can feel like a lot. So today I want to talk about 3 ways to repurpose your podcast content. Now, some of these ways we have talked about before. I'm going to run through those. We're going to make sure to link back to the past episodes with that. But it's such an important part of being a business owner and creating content, or even just being a content creator. Maybe you're not a business owner and you are looking to use the time and effort that you're putting into a podcast and repurposing that into other places. All right. So the first one is one that you probably know so well, and that is repurposing the podcast content into social content or more content. So that could be weekly emails, that could be your social media posts, blog posts, anything like that. You can use that podcast content to, even if you're doing social posts. So let's talk about social media for a second. There are 3 different ways that we tend to repurpose our clients' podcast episodes. The first is some type of quote or question. So is there a question that was asked on the show that you can use to engage with your audience? Or is there a quote that hits home the importance of that topic? So in this episode, I could use the question, are you repurposing your podcast content? And how? So that would get engagement. Maybe people would say, oh, I'm not, or I try to, or I do it these 3 different ways. Whatever it is, it gets that engagement going. And then people who say that they're not, I can then redirect them back to the episode where I talk through these different strategies. So that is one example of the 3 ways that we tend to repurpose our podcast content into social media posts for our clients. The second one is some type of audiogram. Since most of the social platforms are highlighting short form video type content, audiograms are a great way to make the most of that. You'll note that on Facebook and LinkedIn both, they are also adding in their own captions. So that's always an option as well. But I do recommend using something like Wave, WAVVE, or Headliner app to add those captions to your posts. We're also seeing that you can create story size audiograms and share them to Instagram as reels. Adding in those captions is great, especially since Instagram won't let you use their captions feature if it's not something that's being spoken directly into the app. So if you're grabbing that video and you're adding it, they're not going to recognize the audio. And then when you add in that audio, make sure that you title it. That way people can search for that kind of stuff if they need it. But that is a way that we kind of create that second promo, and that is those videograms, audiograms, reels, etc. with the captions. So we stop the scroll. And then another way is just a general post about the podcast or about the episode. Like, hey, did you listen to this? Hey, have you heard of this? And making sure that each of them are a bit unique in their own way, still on brand for you, still making sense for what you're trying to post on social media. But those are the 3 ways that we recommend that people share their posts on social media. And that is how we do it with our clients who are full service and have that social media package attached. Weekly emails, that can also be monthly emails instead of just weekly emails. That way you do more of a roundup, or you could do weekly and just say, here's the topic, but you're already taking what you've already talked about on your podcast and turn that into a way to connect deeper with your email subscribers who might not be listening to your podcast, who might not be following you on social media. I know there's been a bit of an exodus from certain platforms. So if they're not seeing you there, where are they seeing you? Possibly their inbox. So it's important to make sure that you're showing up in all of those places for people. And if you're feeling like, well, what if they follow me on all these places? What if they already follow my podcast? What if they already follow me on social media? What if they already are in my email? Most of the time, we need those reminders, those friendly reminders of, hey, did you listen to this? Hey, this episode is great. It's fantastic. Did you check it out yet? Don't feel like you can't share it in all those places. Sometimes people need that soft nudge of like, hey, I've got this thing. You should check it out. All right, moving on to the second way to repurpose podcast content, and that is to turn it into more episodes. And I'm going to share an example after I go through these 3 and talk through how I was able to take one episode and turn that into multiple different forms of content. So ways that you can repurpose podcast content into more episodes, and we talked about this on the episode about going deep instead of wide, and that is having past guests on to talk further about a topic. I've done this a few times. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that it's actually a really great strategy to, 1, make a deeper connection with those guests that you have on that you really enjoy talking to and bring value to your audience. If that person is bringing value, I would rather you have them on multiple times than to throw in a guest who might not be a good fit for your audience, who might not bring value. So don't feel like, oh, well, they already heard this person on, or maybe they're going to think that I'm starting to co-host the show because I've had this person on a few times. Like most of the time, especially if it's an episode that got a lot of downloads, you're fine having that person back on. They're giving you value. They're giving you content that you can use into what I just talked about, that extra content like weekly emails, blog posts, or email content. The second way to repurpose your podcast content into more episodes is to look through those episodes and see where you can potentially go deeper with the topics that you've already talked about. So in this case, I'm actually doing the reverse. I've gone deep on the episode of, I believe it was 15 ways to repurpose your podcast content. And then I have an episode called Going Deep Instead of Wide with your podcast content. And then the third way of repurposing your content is to use it as supplemental content. So I have an episode called Using Your Podcast Content as Supplemental Content for Your Clients. So I'm doing the reverse in that I'm taking those 3 episodes and giving you guys a general overview and reminder, especially as we head into the new year, that you can repurpose your content. You're putting so much effort and time and potentially money into the podcast. Why not make the most of it? So I could have done it reverse, where I said these are the 3 ways and then broken them down into further episodes. But in this case, we're doing it flip-flop. So look at those past episodes, especially the ones in the beginning where you gave very high level information or gave, 15 ways to do something. How can you break that down even further and ensure that your audience is getting the most of you, getting the most of your knowledge and the most of the information that you have available in your brain for them? All right, the third way to repurpose podcast content is into supplemental content for your clients, your audience, your membership, and course members. If you have a membership or you have a course, your podcast content is fantastic supplemental content. I actually just had a conversation with a new client about this. She has a course and she is looking to obviously make the most of her podcast. And I shared this idea with her of, hey, well, why don't you take these conversations that you've had on the podcast about the topics that you're talking about in your course, things that are going to add value, things that are going to add more information to your audience and education for them that you've already created. Like you already spent the time, you already spent the money on creating this content. How can you make the most of it? Getting those extra downloads, making sure that your audience has all of the information that they need. And when you are able to tailor your membership content and tailor your course content and add in those episodes, not only does it alleviate you having to repeat yourself about certain things, but it also allows your audience to have a better idea of categorically that topic. Here's what I mean by that. If I have someone in my membership who is struggling with podcast content, and I say, well, you can check the podcast for all of the episodes about content. Instead, I could say, hey, are you at the part where you're wanting to create new content? Are you planning your content? Or are you repurposing your content? Like those are three different aspects of the podcast content side. And if they say, oh, I would like to plan out my content. I'm having a really hard time organizing it and planning it out. Perfect. I would have a whole section about organizing and planning your podcast content. I have a few episodes that I can throw in there, and they don't have to go scouring through 80 plus at this point episodes trying to figure out where I talked about planning and organizing your podcast content. So there's so much room to be able to use your podcast as more than just repurposing it into more episodes or repurposing it into more content. All right, I'm going to give you some examples. So I had a podcast episode called 15 Ways to Improve Your Podcast Results. I'm going to turn that into a tip series. So it'll have a video, a static post on social media, as well as an email sequence. That way, and it's a quick and easy funnel for me, I've already created it, and I can say, hey, would you like 3 tips over 5 days to help you improve your podcast results? Awesome. Give me your email, and then here are the quick video tips. Here's the email sequence. Here's a static post that I can use over 15 weeks on social media. Like, there's so much room to use this stuff. I can also do groups of 5 for reels. So I can create 3 different reels where I say, here are 5 ways to improve your podcast results. And then I can do another one. Here are 5 more ways to improve your podcast results. Here are 5 more ways to improve your podcast results. Do you see what I did there? So I've already created the content. I already have the thing there, but being able to repurpose it into more content saves me time and mental effort. Like, I don't have to think too hard about it because I've already created it. All right, another example is I have an episode called The Future of Podcasting. Now, what I did was I turned it into a client report for the year end, and I was able to add that as information to my clients. Most of my clients don't listen to my podcast. There's maybe 2 that listen to my podcast. And since most of them don't listen, they're not going to get this information, especially as we head into the end of the year and the new year. Like, they're busy. They might not have time to sit with me and to talk through these things. So giving them a report is super simple. I've already written out everything I needed for that podcast episode. So to be able to just throw it into a report is super easy. Next, I turned it into a blog post. So I turned that report into a full-length blog post on my website, embedded the code for people to listen to the episode if they wanted to. Next, I turned it into a LinkedIn article. So I shared it on LinkedIn and shared it with some other podcasters so that they could share it with their friends. I also turned it into an Instagram carousel. So here's where I see the future of podcasting going. Here's what to look out for. Here are my thoughts and feelings on these things. That Instagram carousel actually got a lot of traction too. And then I redirected people to listen to the podcast episode. Like, yes, they're going to get information from the carousel, but that podcast episode gives so much more. And last, turning it into a freebie download report. So in the new year, which at this point, if you're listening in the future, hello future, this report will probably already be live at this point. So it'll be a freebie where people can download the report and potentially sign up for a strategy session if they want to talk through how they can make the most of their podcast based on what I've said. So those are just two examples of how I'm able to take one podcast episode and turn it into more. And as you saw, they were very different things that I was able to turn them into. It wasn't the same thing. I didn't just repurpose them into the same things. You can find variety and find different ways to do it. So if you have questions or you're like, hey, Alicia, I need help because I can't think of how to repurpose my content and I want to make the most of it, book a call. We can chat about ways that you can make the most of your time and effort that you're already putting into your show. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.